a couple of different ways. We've started to add some COVID things into this. Oh, that's not the one you want. See, it did it. It did the same thing. I tried this ahead of time and it did the same thing. So let me see if this works. No. Try one more time here. But today we'll talk through some of the disaster planning as well as bringing employees back and things of that nature. It's obviously a weird time for all of us, and again, you know, I hope that this is beneficial information. I am going to be sending out a couple of resources for you that I'm also going to discuss during this presentation. We'll spend about 15 minutes or so on the disaster planning side and then 15 minutes or so on the employee side. It's kind of going to blend together a little bit, so it's a good pick. Dave, I know you had a hand in picking some of this stuff, and I appreciate the insight into what you guys are interested in. So I will go ahead and get started and quit talking so much. But I hope everyone is well. I hope things haven't been too crazy and terrible. I know, I don't know, is everyone on this from Washington, or is there from Idaho and Oregon as well? Do we know?
We have some from Idaho, and
okay.
I don't recognize anybody from Oregon there.
Okay, okay. Very good. Well, this should be general enough to apply to everyone. I know every state's different, so but let's get going. So the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is this booklet. It was one of the resources that you're going to get. It's actually a disaster planning booklet that you can work through as a business owner, and just kind of, I'll walk through kind of how that works the best. And Brenda and Jeff, I have this set up to go to you guys, so it'll come after this presentation is done. And then obviously it's hard to go through any presentation right now without talking about the elephant in the room, right? That's the little lovely COVID virus that's hitting all of us right now. But let's start on disaster planning. Obviously, COVID is a disaster in many respects, but we're going to focus mostly right now on some of the more physical things we can do to prepare for something like a COVID or a fire or you know, weather-related incident, something like that. So first things first, what do you have to do? Well, you have to identify your risks, right? You have to know what they are, what the probability of them happening even is, and how bad they could inevitably be. And then, you know, what's the likelihood of it even coming to fruition? You know, is that even going to happen? And then what actions, if that did happen, do we need to take? And you can see there on the right side of the screen, the OFBEZ. OFB stands for Open for Business. And that's the idea of this whole pamphlet, is to get basically an inventory so that you can, how do I say it? So that you can get back up and running as quickly as possible. And so let's walk through some of that. I'm going to start with fire prevention. Obviously, depending on where you're located, fire is or isn't as much of an external threat, right? But it still is an internal threat. I know there's plenty of shops that have stuff happen like this, and there's always something to take into account and make sure that we're doing the right risk management things. So again, how real is your threat? Do you have processes in place to eliminate those? You know, dirty rags, where are they going? Are they just piling you should see some of the stuff we see. Are they just piled in a cardboard box waiting to explode, or are they actually put away in a good tin and everything like that? So there's lots of little things like that that can make all the difference. And then of course, paying attention to detail. You'll see that checklist also is included in that packet. So it's a great idea. Just walk through your shop and see where you're at. Maybe there's something that we have neglected for, you know, a couple of years. We just haven't thought about it because it's not come up at all. So just a good way to go through your shop here. Know your operations is kind of the next step. Like, what are your main things that you do? You know, is there something you could survive without? You know, do we need the projects, or is the bread and butter more the regular service stuff that we're doing every day? What is your specific thing that your main product, your main livelihood comes from? And then, of course, you know, which of these processes have legal, contractual, if it's like fleet service or anything like that, regulatory, financial obligations, things like that as well. And again, this worksheet will help you walk through that. not only knowing your operations, but knowing your employees is really important. Now, I know that, most of us in this industry kind of become a small family, right? Or a large family, however you want to look at that. We see each other every day. We crack jokes with each other every day, and we sweat with each other every day, and we know that stuff. But what if our standard protocols, our standard ways of communicating are down? Like if somebody is always reached through their home phone, what's the best cell phone number for them, or vice versa? What are the best ways to contact them? And then, of course, keep a copy of all the information you collect on them off-site securely. I say both of those things intentionally. Secure, obviously, is huge. And then off-site, it doesn't really do a whole lot of good to keep all that information in a desk that just burned down to the ground, right? So you got to be thinking about some of these backup things. We do recommend updating that at least every 6 months or every time you hire someone new. That's just a good rule of thumb to make sure that if, God forbid, something happens and it burns down to the ground, we know how to get back up and running as fast as possible. And then also know your key contacts. Obviously, we were dealing with a lot of suppliers and vendors in this industry. Do we have backups just in case something hit everybody else too and you need to go outside of that? Do you have someone that's maybe, a little bit further away that can get stuff to you, slightly delayed, but they didn't get affected by the same thing you did? So what are some backup options for you? And then of your primary vendors, know their contingency plans. Do they have one? Do they have a way to source things that you need to continue operations? And then, of course, know how to communicate with everybody, similar to employees. If you're used to reaching Bill at the parts shop down the street by office phone, make sure you got a good cell phone or email, depending on how that's working. So, moving forward, know your information tech too. We talked a little bit briefly just a second ago about keeping information. The best way to test this thing out is to make sure that you test it out. A lot of us hire folks to watch our security, but we never see if it actually works. And so it's a really good idea to make sure and have not just the records off-site, but say, okay, Ted from the tech company, what happens if this happens? What about this scenario? Can we take an hour or two and just run through what needs to happen so that we know in this instance what we need to do if it happens? So, and then of course, know your finances. This is always the interesting slide. Obviously, we feel like we know our finances and everything, but let's make sure, do we have a cash reserve? Do we have credit available? Where are we going to go with good relationships that people know we're going to get back to them with stuff? What expenses have to be paid? What are kind of waiting out there that are to be paid at a later date? How will you make payroll? I know we just talked about the PPP thing. That's obviously adding to the layers of complexity in all of this, but also important. And then, of course, know your insurance coverage. Obviously, we're an insurance company, right? But we're really a risk management company, and it's really important. I mean, stuff changes day to day in our operations. We need to know for sure. We need to meet with our insurance person once or twice a year to make sure that whether that's Federated or if that's someone else, just make sure that inventories are where they need to be, building values are where they need to be, payrolls are where they need to be. That way we can take care of you in a crazy event. So that's an important thing as well. You'd be amazed how often that's forgotten. We see it more often than not. So would like to obviously, let us come in, take a look and take a look and see what we can do. And I mentioned this earlier, but update and test your plan. Now that you've got this plan in place, can you communicate what you can communicate? Not all of it, obviously, but do your key employees know your plan? And I'm just going to real quickly, I'm going to plug something here. What if something happens to you? What if something happens to you? What happens to the rest of your employees and their families if something happens to you? Do you have a contingency plan for that? And this is something that Federated is known for. We work with our clients, and as much as they allow us to help plan for business succession in a crazy event, I mean, God forbid it would happen, but if something happens to a owner or a key employee, that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt bad. How do we keep this thing going? And so we have a third-party attorney network. We go around and we actually find these people. They're not federated attorneys, but it is a free service that we're extending to all ASA members, whether you're a federated client or not, during this time, for basically a free consultation to see what's your buy-sell arrangement look like, what's your estate plan look like, and all that stuff. And I can't tell you the number of businesses that we see close due to death or disability of active owners or key employees. That's a way bigger number than anything else that we see for business closure. So just letting you know that, that's a plug. I'd be happy to put you in touch with the folks that we use in your state. There's different ones for each state. And so be glad to do that. Again, no obligation, complimentary to you. Huge piece of this disaster planning plan though. And then, and how often are you updating the info, right? You can sense a theme, keep the stuff updated, right? And then where else can you go for help? You know, do you have local authorities we can talk to? Where are we going? Let's call the fire marshal, have him come in, check some stuff. I know we don't always want to do that, but just ask him, say, hey, can you spend 5, 10, 15 minutes with us and let us know what we need to do in this type of event? What are you guys going to need, right? And on that, if the event happens, what do we actually do? You know, is your communication plan in full effect? Is that on site? Is it off site? Again, police, fire department, etc., OSHA, EPA, whatever it is. Obviously, we deal with stuff that's EPA affected, or it affects that whole area, and so something to think about and have a plan for. Again, this whole booklet helps you walk through all of this stuff. But again, too, I will say preserve the scene is probably one of the most important points on this slide. It's treat it kind of like a crime scene, you know, make sure that when you have people come in and try and clean this thing up, that nothing's been changed or altered. You're not trying to like hide stuff, just leave it as what it is. And we'll figure it out. A lot of us want to be helpful in cleaning up the scene, and in reality, the best thing to do is to not. Can actually slow down the process to do that. So, all right. This slide is for pandemic preparedness, and basically it's all the same stuff. But you know, you can take this whole plan and apply it to pandemic stuff. You can plan for the impact on your business, your employees, your finances, everything. What does that actually look like? And again, and you guys are finding out, you know, how am I communicating to my employees that it's time to come back to work? I know essential business, I understand that, but there's still opportunities for folks to be away from business. And I'll be glad to tackle some of those at the end of this thing if you have specific questions. I can't guarantee an answer. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a lawyer. And I don't even look like either of those things. But, you know, it's important to address what we can, and I've learned a lot going through this, as have you, and I'm sure we can ping off of each other. So I want to move forward to talking about more employee-specific stuff with screening, hiring, and retaining folks. Obviously, huge impact to bottom lines and longevity of a business. All of the above here, screening, hiring, and retaining. You know, what is the I'm gonna move this a little bit here. What's the what are your practices reflective of? Do candidates like applying for positions, do they understand your culture? Can your current employees communicate your culture? And I like to throw this picture up here to just kind of show the differences. Right, this guy and a mirror there, you can see there's obviously two distinct differences. Same guy, different look. You know, what does our culture look like? What do we think it looks like? And what does it really look like? Maybe that's the better way to say it. Are we making sure that our culture is reflective of what we want it to be? So how are you finding talent today? And I'd be curious to know, and maybe if you guys just want to put something in the chat, what you guys are finding. I mean, know there's a ton of places. I mean, there's ads, LinkedIn, Craigslist, trade publications, trade schools, high schools, local colleges, things like that, referrals, things of that nature. You know, which ones are yielding the best quality candidates for you? And then we're also going to talk through how do you communicate your culture, background screening, drug and alcohol screening, new employee orientation, and training as well. This probably comes as no shock to any of you, but 56% of employers are having difficulty filling positions due to lack of suitable talent. Suitable being the key word. Sometimes it's hard to even find a warm body, right? But the reality is suitable talent is incredibly difficult to find. You guys are doing some awesome stuff with ATE and how involved you are with some of the local things that are going on. It's cool to hear every time I get to be part of one of your board meetings or association events, just how active you are, because you realize how important it is. It's hugely important, right? Let's see here. So let me ask you this question. Is employee retention important to your company? Obvious answer, yes. But then you ask it again and say, well, is it? What am I doing to help retain employees? It's costly when you lose an employee, right? You lose goodwill with customers. Maybe it's your best person, right? Sometimes it might take 2 people to replace 1 person, and that's very expensive. This is an interesting stat too. The cost of replacing employees has been estimated at 25% of employees' total compensation. I've heard that number a lot higher for a lot of different positions, especially in your industry, a highly technical industry as far as skill set goes. That can definitely be more than 25%. Because if you've got somebody who does 2 people's worth of work, you got to hire 2 or 3 people to replace that person and bring them up to speed. That could be a couple, 3, 4, 5, 10-year event, right? So it's going to be costly. So let's keep them around. Let's figure out how to keep them around. And then, so what do we do with that? Compensation, quality workplace, employ quality people. That's generally a good idea and a great way to keep good talent around. So let's look at who's in the workforce. And this is always interesting to me. You have your traditionalists, right? You have your baby boomers, your Gen Xers, and your millennials. And what's interesting about these different generations is they've all been defined by different social events and life events and world events. And it shapes their worldview completely differently. I'm sure you can all identify each of these 4 folks, and there's even younger ones, right? But each of these 4 folks all have a different interest and they value different things. And then you start looking at what actually makes up the workplace. You've got 28 million in traditionalists, this is population, not workplace. 28 million in the population of traditionalists, 75 million baby boomers, 66 million Gen Xers, and 75 million millennials. So what's interesting about this is just note that we still have a lot of boomers and millennials in the workforce, but Gen X is about 10 million less people. But the millennial figure is going to increase probably with immigration as well. And then what percentage of the workforce are they, right? 2%, not a lot left in traditionalist percentage of the workforce. 29% is baby boomer, 34% is Gen X, and 34% is millennial. Again, you'll note that millennials are now surpassing the Gen X in the workforce. It's the largest generation out there. And so this is only going to continue to increase as more and more boomers exit the workforce too. So I told you guys there's 2 resources. This is our second resource. Some of you have seen this, some of you have not, but we will have that available for you electronically as well. That is going to go to Jeff and Brenda, and it's going to include things such as what you see there on the screen. And I guess a couple of key questions I want to ask is, do managers throughout your organization follow the same checklists if you're hiring? Are you doing all the hiring, or is that up to somebody else sometimes? If it is you doing the hiring, are you doing the same thing every time? Just sidebar here with this whole COVID event. one of the things that's happened to folks is the idea of furlough. And I don't know if any of you have had to furlough or lay off people. Each way is different in how they qualify for benefits or not, or pay, or however that is, for unemployment and stuff. But what's really, really important right now is to guard yourself and keep everything the same. Whether you did furlough people or not, or you're bringing someone else's furloughed people over, right, and you're hiring new people, keep your processes exactly the same. Doesn't matter if it's a manager or if it's you guys have to do the same thing. And so that's where these things like the hiring checklist, the application, all of these things, if they're uniform and they're the same every time, the same process, that's going to be hugely important for you to protect yourself from lawsuits coming down the pike. I guarantee they're going to be coming. So it's something to really be mindful of. Another thing too, obviously affecting your industry. Did you know that, so this is a Federated number, there's over 1 million MVRs checked from 2015 to 2018. 110,000 of those exceeded standards. Exceeded standards means that they should not be in a vehicle driving for a business, right? They should not be doing test drives due to DUIs or whatever it was, right? They shouldn't be in a rig. Which is, I mean, this is 11% of the drivers checked. And the question we always ask here is, how many drivers have you insured lately? Do you have a set of driving standards that everyone has to adhere to? And so it's the same all the way through. Are you owning this, or are you expecting the insurance company to own it? Because there's only so much insurance you can buy, right? If it goes above that amount, where are we at? Whose pocket does that come out of, right? So just something to bear in mind. Interesting here, 30% business failures. Negligent hiring is responsible for 30% of business failures. That's a tragic number. It's one that just doesn't need to exist. One of the things you can do to help avoid this, obviously, is pull motor vehicle records and stuff like that. Get their permission, of course. But you can also do background screening. You can do background screening. What kind of person is this, just on paper at least? There's a lot of companies out there. This is one that we've found that does a really good job. If you're a Federated client, you have access to these guys. You have access to them outside of Federated as well. It just might not be at a reduced rate. So, that's just, IntelliCorp's one. There's a bunch of them out there. Highly encourage background screenings. And then, of course, drug and alcohol screening. I won't do a poll here because I don't know if we have that, but what's the opioid epidemic look like right now? Right? I'm going to show you a couple of numbers from 2012 that you're not going to like. 68% of drug users are employed, and that's about $81 billion worth of lost productivity. These numbers are from 2012. And again, the question is the opioid epidemic got better or worse since that point? And the answer, of course, is it's gotten worse. This is a reality that we have to deal with. And I think a couple of things that's really good with drug testing is, one, it can deter employees from coming into work affected by or impaired by drugs or alcohol. It also can discourage users from showing up in the first place to be interviewed by you or even applying to your business. Again, what's that culture piece that people know out there about you? Are you the place that anybody can go work, or are you the place that has a great environment that's protecting their employees, right? So they don't have to worry about problems that can arise from these types of things. Another company we found, Alere. Again, there's a bunch of them out there. Alere does a great job. They've compiled a bunch of stats out there, and they're really good at drug and alcohol screening. So what are the components of a good drug and alcohol program? Well, written policy, always a great start. Policy statement, notice of drug and alcohol testing, consent to testing, and disciplinary action. So in short, make sure everybody knows this from top to bottom and that everybody follows it, right? Clearly lay out, here's our expectations. You're agreeing to this. You're going to sign that you agree to this and that you're going to follow it. Here's the consequences if you don't, right? I mean, that's the long and the short of it. pretty straightforward, but again, you'd be amazed how many companies we see with handbooks that don't specifically address this. So it's hugely important. And then any supervisors that you have, make sure that they're aware of everything too. Again, this kind of goes back to the first half of this presentation, but make sure that they know what's going on, what actions to take. If Bill comes into, sorry, if somebody named Bill on here, I apologize. I just always use Bill. That's my generic term. But if Bill comes into work drunk, what do we do? What's our option? Obviously there's things that need to be put in place. That needs to be clearly lined out. Supervisors, if you're not there as an owner, supervisor, key employee, whoever's in charge, needs to know what to do and how to take action and be empowered to do so. And then, of course, if you do have employees going through this, at the end of the day, our companies are people, right? Our companies don't work without people. We have at least an impaired person at best if they're under the influence of a drug or of drugs or alcohol. Get them some help. Figure out a way to put them in touch with places like the EAP or the NAADAC. This is people. This is people. We care about our people, and that's why we plan all these things out, is to make sure that we're protecting everything that we can and have a good risk management culture. So retention and performance management for current employees. Make sure that you have a current employee checklist, an orientation checklist for new folks. Make sure that you have accurate position descriptions and you provide performance reviews. One of the things that we see in litigation more often than not is that just basically unclear expectations either were or were not set. And so somebody gets sued, or a company gets sued because they fired Bill, poor Bill, I keep picking on him, but they fired Bill and Bill doesn't really know why, right? I know the whole at-will state argument and all that stuff, but the reality is, in our current legislative state, in almost a vindictive state that we live in with juries, we've got a government that is talking about $2 and $3 trillion worth of money going out to the public. A $2 million lawsuit is nothing, right? Even in the public's opinion. And so juries are so much more willing to grant large awards for mistreatment of employees. And really the key to all of this is just making sure that you have clear expectations, they're clearly communicated, and everybody agrees to everything as much as you're able. That's really the key to this stuff. And so think of it like this, right? Who wants to lead more and who wants to manage less, right? Managing can be tough on everybody, the person doing it and the person receiving it, right? So you're gonna have to bear with me here. I'm kind of a baseball guy. I miss baseball like crazy right now. I really hope that they start up on July 4th. That'd be the coolest thing ever because it'd be America's birthday with America's pastime. Would love that. But anyway, imagine a baseball team. Think about how all the players on the team contribute to the success of the team, and think about the pitchers. Would you manage the pitchers the same way as you manage the catchers? Or take it another way, would you manage your starting pitcher the same way as you manage a relief pitcher, right? You're gonna talk to them differently. Now you think about your employees. Does your performance management system allow for flexibility? Do you look at the strengths of each employee? Employees in service positions are different than assembly line employees, right? You can't imagine them all the same way. There's way too many variables in this industry to manage employees the exact same way. So if you want to manage less and lead more, you do this and you become a great coach. There's the gratuitous great coaches of our age. Yeah, there you go. I don't know if anybody's a Cardinals fan or not, but so I apologize if you're not. I'm really not either. I just like those coaches. So as a leader, you're a coach, right? You're a mentor, you're a motivator. Great coaches have different characteristics, including focusing on results, the individual characteristics of each employee, things that are different about each one of them, and their individual performance, trying to lead them to be the best that they can be. And that you're right there through both successes and hardships. So what Federated has done in this, it's obviously a super complex environment, legally and all the things that come up. So we've come up with our Federated Employment Practices Network. Check with, if you're not a Federated client, check with your insurance company. They may have something similar, I don't know. But we have employment law attorneys on retainer, and as part of the coverage that you would have with Federated is that you have access to them for free. And they'll actually guide you through the scenario if Bill comes in to work drunk and punches somebody. What do we do? How do we document this thing? How do we walk through this thing? Allows you to ask questions. There's a whole bunch of Q&A online too. You don't even have to talk to an attorney necessarily. You might be able to find the answer there. And then one of the things for you guys too is we are going to be putting out a whole bunch of webinars. Obviously, this COVID environment has led us to focusing on webinars like this. Typically, I'd be doing something like this in front of you, face to face, which is, I'll be really honest, way easier than doing a webinar. But the reality is we're going to come out with a lot of stuff that's going to be free for you guys to take part of. And we would love to know, and Jeff, maybe I'll ask you just as a sidebar later, but what are some things that you guys want to know that we might be able to tackle as far as a webinar goes? What specifically? I'm not an attorney. I'm not an HR attorney, but we do have access to them. Would a webinar from one of them be helpful? There's just a lot of things that we can do for you guys that we plan on doing. So would love to hear those ideas. It can be after all this. That's totally fine. So one thing real quick too that I'll just with this COVID environment, this came from our webinar from an HR attorney, not me, okay, but from an HR attorney. They're practicing the 6-20-100 rule. Does anyone know what that is? I wasn't totally aware of it until I heard it. So basically, a lot of folks are using tape on, and this, I know this, some of this might just sound ridiculous, but just bear with me. This is what's going on. There's tape on the floor for, you can maybe control the flow of how people are walking around the shop. Again, bear with me, but control the flow of how people are walking around the shop. If there's a great gathering place, a water cooler, if you will, a 6-foot social distance bubble, right? You can put tape on the floor to kind of mark some of that. The 6-20-100 is the 6-foot social distancing. 20 seconds for washing hands, right? You can sing the whole version of Camptown Ladies, right? You can sing that, or you can do Happy Birthday twice. That's about 20 seconds or so. And then 100 is stay home if your temperature is 100 degrees or more. So I know it's silly, it's simple, but that is some of the stuff that's being put out there. And these are CDC guidelines, right? Not mandatories, not mandates, but it is CDC guidelines. So it's a couple of things to consider again as you're coming back into the swing of things as things ramp up. Is maybe it's a good time to revisit dress code, expectations, attendance, protection, right? You have to provide personal protective equipment for people. I know you guys have been working on that. You guys have been doing a great job with that, the ASA. And then, revisit performance rubrics in this time. Do we have to sanitize and sterilize different things? I don't know the answer to all that, but it's definitely considerations to have. At the end of the day, hiring and retaining right people in your organization will help you create the right environment or remain as the employer of choice in your community. And organizations that become employers of choice now will have the advantage in finding and keeping skilled employees in the future. So when you're selective in who you employ, that reputation becomes known. And again, if you're not, that also becomes known. So who are we attracting? And then again, to put up this picture, what do we look like? right? What do we look like? Who are you retaining? Who are you hiring? Who's leaving you? Are the good ones going or the bad ones going, right? What does your culture actually look like? So we're all connected through this. And I know, Jeff, you said earlier that there's possible questions and things of that nature. So what I'll do is I will stop sharing this thing and see if there's any questions at all.
You can either come off the mute if you'd like to and ask a question, or you could type it in the chat section if anyone has any questions. And we'll be supplying everything on our website, and Brenda will send that out. How about if we put that in the next Dateline, that you could click on it, Brenda, and they could go directly to get the information from Jim.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, and Jeff, you guys will have both of those two resources, that HR forms and policies and that Open for Business booklet in your email here anytime. So
great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jim, so much. And doesn't look like we have any questions. I want to thank everyone for being on the call, and thank everyone for your support of ASA, because we can't do what we do without you guys. So thank you guys so much. And thank you, Jim, again. And yay.
My pleasure.
All
Look
right.
forward to seeing everybody in person eventually again.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, I did have a comment. You mentioned about other things that might be a good topic for.
Yes, please.
I know you guys have a really good campaign on the phone use thing.
Okay.
About driving and phones and the importance, and some statistics on that, because I went through that whole thing a couple of years ago back
Sure.
in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And it was
Awesome.
really shocking to hear some of those statistics about cell phone use while driving and how important it is to make sure your staffs aren't doing that. And we all have technicians that drive cars constantly throughout the day. And that
No doubt.
might be a really good topic, because when I came back from that, I did change the policy. I had a phone policy, but I shared some of the stuff that I got from that seminar, and really hit home with a lot of people on how important it is. It's high, it's a higher risk than drunk driving.
It is significantly.
Yeah, like double the amount.
Right.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
that might be a good something to do. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it goes from 4 to 1 or to 9 to 1 or something like that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a nutty deal. Yep. But no, appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks again, Jim.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Think Federated. Thank you.
Thanks, Federated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brenda. You're on mute, but close enough. Thanks, Dave. Good to see you. Whoa, where's my phone?